You don't need anyone to remind you that you've already lived more than half your life. You know that. The issue is not how much time has passed, it's how you're looking at what's ahead. You call it the final chapter. I call it your first real opportunity. The first time you truly have the right to define life on your own terms. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to show you a perspective society doesn't want you to see. If you're in your 60s, this is not the ending chapter. This is the chapter where, for the first time, you no longer have to live to please others, no longer bear the weight of raising children, no longer fight for position, no longer feel pressured to prove anything to the world. And precisely because of that, you are finally free to live, to choose, to begin again, not with the recklessness of youth, but with the depth of someone who has tasted every flavor of life. I want you to stop and really face this truth. Maybe you've never actually lived a single day fully for yourself. Maybe you've spent 3 or 4 decades fulfilling duties, raising children, caring for aging parents, sacrificing for others. But now, what? When life gets quieter, when the calendar isn't packed, when others' opinions are no longer your only compass, can you admit you've lost yourself in your own life? And if the answer is yes, then this is the moment to take it back. 60 is not life slowing down, it's awareness speeding up. At this age, you're no longer trapped in illusions. You see clearly who's real and who's not. You know what matters and what's just noise. You don't need anyone to teach you how to live. You've lived, stumbled, and risen. The question is no longer, can I start, but how will I start with all the wisdom I now possess? The world doesn't teach you how to begin at 60. It only teaches people to chase everything before 40. That's why so many, stepping into their 6th decade, fall into emptiness, feel irrelevant, feel replaced. But the truth is, you are not irrelevant. You are overflowing with experience, understanding, and depth that the world desperately needs. You just haven't learned how to wield it as a strategic advantage. Think about everything you've been through: loss, heartbreak, recovery, persistence, quiet battles. Those aren't just memories. That's life capital. That's competitive edge. No school can teach it. No technology can replicate it. You are not starting from zero. You're starting from a height that very few have the patience to climb to. People ask, what can you start at 60? I say, everything, because this is the first time you're no longer bound by duty. You only need one thing: the courage to admit you still want a meaningful life, not just a responsible one. You don't have to do something grand. You just have to do something right. Not right by others, right by you. Maybe it's opening a small shop, writing a book, learning a new skill, mentoring the younger generation, sharing what you know, restarting something you once gave up. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is, do you dare allow yourself to live truthfully, even now? I'm not asking whether you have enough time left. I'm asking, how many dreams haven't you lived yet? How many desires have you buried, thinking it's not the time? Look at me and answer honestly. If this is the time, then what? Don't confuse too late with never started. You're not someone at the end of a journey. You're someone entering the most thrilling part, where you live not because you have to, but because you want to. Not out of obligation, but out of essence. And no one can take that from you. You only need to decide. The rest begins from that very decision. There's a kind of deception more dangerous than criticism. It's the soft whisper repeated so many times that you begin to believe it's true. You should rest at your age. Leave the big things to the younger generation. You don't have the energy to start over. These aren't words of care, they are lullabies. And poured into your ears from all directions: society, the media, even those you love the most. And the scariest moment is when you start repeating them to yourself. I want you to pause for a second and really think about this. If you've survived life's storms, carried your family through hardship, worked 10, 12 hours a day without complaint, stayed calm amidst chaos, how can you now believe that at 60 you're weaker, useless, or past your prime? That is the perfect distortion society has crafted to push you out of the game, right when you're at your most valuable. Because here's the truth: the modern world doesn't reward depth. It rewards speed. It craves novelty, noise, and flashy moments. But you, after 60 years of living and observing, have become what the world fears most, someone wise enough not to be fooled by surface appearances. And that's exactly why they try to silence you, make you doubt yourself, make you think your time is up. So they don't even have to face the truth that you are the mirror reflecting the very mistakes they're repeating. 60 is not a limit. It's the phase where all illusions fall away, where all social roles are complete, and you, for the first time, can live authentically. No more proving anything to anyone, no more chasing false ideals, no more being swept into a race you never truly wanted to run. When you were young, you needed others to validate you, but now you can be who you are without anyone's permission. That is a form of freedom most people never reach in their lifetime. I once met a man named William, 62 years old, laid off after more than 3 decades at a paper company. He thought his life was over until he remembered his youthful hobby, fixing things. No business plan, no capital, no tech skills, yet he started filming simple repair tutorials for older adults and posted them on YouTube. A year later, he had over 1 million followers. That didn't happen because he was young. It happened because he had something real to share. You might not want fame, you might not need to make money from your experiences, but you need to understand this. If you keep staying silent, if you keep believing that your age is a burden instead of a treasure, then you are helping spread the very lie that is not only killing your dreams, but also crushing the dreams of young people waiting for someone to guide them with real wisdom. Don't let those soft-spoken yet diminishing phrases define the rest of your life. Just stay peaceful. Don't take on too much anymore. At this age, what's the point in trying? Those words may sound caring, but they're actually disguised rejections of opportunity. I'm not saying you have to climb mountains, launch a company, or pursue a new degree. I'm saying you have to live meaningfully, and that meaning only comes when you still believe you matter. And that value doesn't lie in how much money you have, how many diplomas you've earned, or how many followers you've gained. It lies in what you've lived through and how much of that you're willing to share, so others don't have to stumble the way you once did. Maybe you no longer have the energy to work 16-hour days, but you don't need to, because when you have wisdom, you don't need speed, you need precision, you need timing. And today's world, full of chaos, instability, and crisis, is starving for exactly that. Calm that comes from lived experience. And only people like you can give it. If you're sitting there doubting yourself, wondering whether you still have value, let me answer clearly, yes. And not just yes, more than ever. But the only condition is this: you must stop believing what society has labeled you with. Age is not destiny. It's just a moment in time. And if this is your moment, then this is the moment you are allowed to begin again in a way no one ever taught you. How many times have you hit rock bottom, endured pain in silence, stood back up when everyone else walked away? Every one of those moments, whether you remember them or try to forget, was an investment. But unlike typical investments, you didn't pay with just time or money. You invested your youth, your sleep, your unseen fears, the dreams you once buried in silence. These 6 decades haven't merely passed, they've been a process of filtering, forging, refining, and accumulating. And if you don't use them as leverage now, they'll become heavy stones of the past, instead of the steps that elevate you in the present. Let me be clear, experience doesn't automatically turn into wisdom. It only becomes wisdom when you look back and know how to use it. Just like gold in the ground, it's only dirt and rock unless it's mined. What you need right now is not to learn something new. What you need is to use what you've already lived through to create something the young can't replicate. Insight. The young may have energy, skills, and ambition, but they don't have what you possess, the ability to read between the lines, to see the trap behind the glitter, to recognize what truly matters in a world full of noise. I once told a friend in his 60s, if you know exactly what cost you 10 years of your life, then simply sharing that could save someone else from 10 years of pain. That is value. Not a degree, not a title, but the transformation of pain into direction. You've survived loss. You've known what it's like to have nothing. You've loved the wrong person, trusted the wrong one, made the wrong choice, and learned how to forgive. If you can't turn all that into value, then you're bearing a treasure that the next generation is desperately trying to uncover with blood and tears. The world is full of advice copied from social media, But far too few people dare to speak the hard-earned truths they've paid for. I don't need you to speak perfectly, eloquently, or like a motivational speaker. I just need you to speak truthfully. I once believed this, and I was wrong. I once did that, and it cost me. I once stayed silent, and it pulled me away from myself. Words like that from someone who's lived 60 years carry more power than any lecture written in a book. You may have thought what you've been through was personal, private, useless to others, but you don't know that millions of people out there are going through exactly what you once did. They just haven't yet found a way out. And when you share, you're not just telling a story, you're shortening someone else's path. You're becoming a living roadmap. You're turning your failures into someone else's foundation. And if that's not value, what is? I want you to look back at your 60 years, not with regret, but with the eyes of a strategist. Ask, what do I understand deeply that others often get wrong? What habit did I take decades to build? What skill do I do well that no one ever noticed? Each answer is a brick to build a bridge, from the past behind you to the future waiting ahead. And the best part is, you don't need to start from scratch. You just need to see what you already have and begin using it. I once met a woman named Sandra, 65 years old, formerly a high school principal in Canada. She quietly retired, thinking the rest of her life would be for reading, tea and flowers. Then COVID hit. Thousands of students fell behind and parents were overwhelmed. Sandra didn't stay still. She reconnected with retired teachers and colleagues, and in less than a year they built an online tutoring network that supported thousands of students across North America. The brilliance wasn't in technology. The brilliance was that they knew what they knew and used it at the right moment. That's leverage. You are at an age where you no longer need to prove anything, and because of that, you hold the ultimate advantage, the ability to create real impact. You're no longer driven by ego. You're no longer pulled into competition. You act for meaning, and the world is in desperate need of people like that. Don't wait for someone to ask what you have to offer. Ask yourself, who can I help move faster, hurt less, or understand deeper because of what I once paid for with my youth? The answer to that question is the key that unlocks the most meaningful chapter of your life. 60 is not a burden, it's an inheritance. And from this moment on, how you use it will decide whether you merely keep living or truly begin. Many people step into their 60s and complain that they no longer have the strength, no longer as resilient as before, no longer enthusiastic about work, no longer motivated to start something new. You can still wake up at 6 a.m. if you have a reason to do so. You can still walk for an hour if you're headed somewhere you long to be. You can still learn something new if you believe it opens the door to a completely different chapter of life. Energy doesn't just appear. It doesn't come from youth. It doesn't come from coffee or supplements. It comes from within, from the deepest part of your being, where your reason for living still resides. I've seen young people, 25, 30 years old, dragging themselves through soulless jobs, stuck in a rhythm of exhaustion that never ends, always foggy, always lost. And I've met people in their 70s, eyes lighting up as they talk about their current projects, hands trembling but still passionately writing, painting, building communities, mentoring the next generation. The difference lies here. One side lives without purpose, the other lives for what they believe in. You don't need anyone to hand you energy. You need a reason that won't let you sit still, something that makes you lose track of time, a mission that makes you forget to count the years. It doesn't have to be grand, but it must be meaningful. It must touch something in you that you've shelved for years because you were too busy, too afraid, or simply convinced that now is not the time. And if not now, then when? I once spoke with a man named Henrik, 61 years old, living in Germany. He spent his whole life working in logistics, warehouse management, unnoticed by most. Until one day, Europe plunged into a supply chain crisis. Ports were backed up, railways failing, chaos everywhere. And they called him, not a tech engineer, not a young expert with degrees. They called the man who had 30 years of real-world experience, who knew every choke point, every route, every lesson never written in books. For the first time in his life, he was recognized for the lived intelligence he carried, and in that moment, he came alive again. His eyes lit up, his posture straightened. Every word he spoke carried clarity and pride, not because someone gave him energy, but because the meaning of the work called him back to himself. The question isn't how much strength do you have left. The real question is, what is it that you must do? That's a question only you can answer. It doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within, from the place where you once buried dreams, extinguished passion, assumed your life had already been decided. But hear me, if you can still feel even a flicker of urgency to do something meaningful, then it is never random. That is a calling. That is a wake-up bell. That is a sign that you are not done. You still have something to fulfill. And if you don't begin, who will? I know you might feel tired, your body may no longer move like it used to, but remember, when your mind has a purpose, your body will follow. Not all at once, not overnight, but slowly, step by step, you will feel life returning to you. Not the kind of energy that screams on the outside, but the deep, steady strength that only shows up when you're living in alignment with the reason you were born. You don't need someone else to tell you you're still capable. You must be the one to stand up, look yourself in the mirror, and say it. I still have something I want to live for, and I will live for it. You've spent too long living for others. Now's the time to live for yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in an honest one. And when you live honestly with your purpose, everything changes. The look in your eyes, the tone of your voice, the beat of your heart, even the way you walk through life. There is no medicine more powerful than a person who has rediscovered their purpose. There is no limit strong enough to stop them. And if you're still reading this, maybe you are that person. Don't wait for inspiration. Don't wait for perfect health. Don't wait for the right conditions. Start with what keeps you awake at night. This energy, it will come. But only when you dare to live for what truly matters. They say if you want to change someone, give them a shock. But I don't believe in shocks. I believe in stories. Because only real stories, told by real people from a real heart, have the power to awaken the part of you that has fallen asleep. And they're stories I could never forget, not because they're grand or dramatic, but because they're so real, so close, and arrived at just the right time for people who thought they were already past their prime. I remember Ruth, a woman living in Melbourne, Australia. She didn't start a business in her 20s, didn't work in tech, had nothing but a pair of baking hands, and a love for dough, needed from the memories of her childhood. At 63, after retiring and losing her beloved husband, she opened a small sourdough bakery with her savings. No brand, no marketing, no desire to get rich. She just wanted to live honestly for the first time in her life. 2 years later, Ruth had 4 shops and a reputation that spread throughout the region. But what made her happiest wasn't profit. It was the first time she felt she was living true to herself. That feeling can't be bought with money or achieved through titles. It only comes when you dare to do what you've delayed your whole life. Then there's William, a man from Oregon, USA. After 34 years working at a paper company, he was laid off at 62. That shock shattered every sense of security. He thought his life was over. But then he remembered an old passion, fixing things. He started filming videos, teaching basic home repairs, replacing faucets, fixing hinges, installing ceiling fans. Just for older adults, he used an old phone and spoke with the warmth of a father figure. A year later, he had over 1 million followers. But the number wasn't the highlight. The highlight was a sentence he wrote in his bio. I thought I'd been discarded, but actually, I was pushed into exactly where I belonged. See? Sometimes what we call failure is just a turn pushing you back onto the path you should have lived all along, but never dared to start. In Canada, there's a woman named Sandra, 65, a retired school principal. She didn't choose rest. When she saw thousands of students being left behind during the pandemic, she rallied hundreds of older teachers like herself and built a free online tutoring network for kids across North America. She didn't start a company, she didn't build an app. She simply used the trust she had earned from teaching a generation and the living wisdom of those the world had almost forgotten. In less than a year, they helped thousands of children catch up. And more importantly, those retired teachers felt alive again, not through work, but through the meaning they thought they had lost. I also can't forget Sylvie, a retired math teacher in France, widowed, living alone, thinking her road had ended. One day she walked past a robotics workshop for children and stopped to watch. Then she started helping. Then she started learning code. A year later, she designed a prototype for a creative competition. Now she teaches programming to the elderly, not to turn them into engineers, but to awaken the intelligence within them that society once dismissed. Every story I've just told you is not meant to make you admire them. It's to help you see yourself. Because you're not lacking resources, you're not lacking ideas, you're just missing one small nod of permission from yourself to begin from exactly where you are. Every single one of those people started after 60, none of them are younger than you, none of them had more advantages. The only difference? They didn't wait another day to live honestly. Think you're too late? You're wrong. You're in the exact moment of clarity, depth, and courage not to chase loud success, but to build something that lasts. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be right. And when you do the right thing, everything else follows. Energy, meaning, community, rebirth. The stories I've just shared aren't special until you realize they could be your story too, if you choose to begin today. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but because you know this is the time. And if you don't live the most beautiful part of your life right now, then what are you waiting for? Today's world doesn't lack intelligence. It's overflowing with artificial intelligence, new technologies, young entrepreneurs, and experts who haven't lived long enough to truly understand what matters. But in the chaos of speed, what's missing most are those who've been through the rise and fall, who've seen things collapse and still chose to stand up again. Those who know that real solutions don't lie in reacting fast, but in staying calm. Not in the theoretical advice, but in the quiet nod of someone who's lived through enough, and you, the one who carries 6 decades of life, are exactly the kind of person the world needs most. The only problem is, no one is telling you that. No one goes on TV to thank people like you. There are no viral posts about the value of a 65-year-old who once led their family through an economic crisis. There's no TikTok trend celebrating those who know how to stay composed when everything falls apart. Because modern society only glorifies what's new, flashy, fast. But don't be mistaken, the world not acknowledging you doesn't mean it doesn't need you. Remember Silhouette at the Allée Salopizé. Let me tell you about Henrik, a 61-year-old man who worked in logistics across Europe. When the supply chain crisis hit, young professionals with their spreadsheets and software were at a loss. But Henrik, who had walked through warehouses, who knew every system bottleneck from 30 years of real experience, was the one they called. He didn't use PowerPoint. He didn't need polished jargon. All he needed was a pen and a sheet of paper, and he redrew the entire operational flow from lived knowledge. Only someone who's lived long enough could have done that. And only when things fall apart do people realize experience never goes out of date. I want you to understand this clearly. You are not invisible. You are simply standing in a time that has forgotten how to see people properly. Value is now measured in likes, speed, and surface-level confidence. But what's truly trustworthy is never loud. You don't need to be flashy. You just need to recognize that you carry something no one else can replicate: lived experience. In Japan, over 15% of the workforce is over 60, and companies don't favor them because they're cheaper. It's because they're reliable. They don't vanish from stress. They don't quit after 6 months. They don't work for applause. They work because they understand the long-term meaning behind what they do. Stability, consistency, sound judgment, calmness in crisis. Those are things no technology can replace. And the sad truth is, while many countries panic about an aging population, it's this very group labeled old that holds the solution society refuses to see. They don't need saving, they need listening. They're not weak. They're waiting for someone clear-headed enough to ask, how did you get through when everything collapsed? What did you do when there was nothing left to believe in? And if no one asks, then you must be the one to speak up first. Not to boast, not to shine, but to share, to pass on the value, to ensure nothing you've lived through goes to waste. Don't confuse the world's silence with your lack of importance. Many young people are lost, searching for direction, but they don't know how to ask. They assume you don't get technology, don't keep up with trends, but they've never heard you tell a real story. And just once, if you speak, not as a teacher, not as a theorist, but as someone lighting the path ahead, they will realize this is what they've been missing. You don't need to start a company. You don't need to become a speaker. Just begin with the simplest thing: a story you kept hidden, a lesson you paid for with mistakes, a moment when you thought you'd break, but somehow kept going. Start from there, and you'll see value isn't in your age, it's in your depth. And the world, though it doesn't say so, is waiting for you to return what it has lost, the courage to live truthfully. You are not left behind. You are ahead. You just need to turn back, reach out and say, I've walked this path before, let me tell you what I saw, so you won't have to walk in the dark alone. The world won't ask you to do this, but the world needs you. And if you're clear-eyed enough to understand that, then it's time to step into the light. Not because you're old, but because you're finally old enough to lead. You might think your story is too small, too personal, too ordinary to make an impact, but you're wrong. The truth is, the world doesn't lack good speakers or performers or scripts designed to impress. What the world lacks is someone brave enough to tell something real in an unfiltered voice, and that person is you. Not because you're perfect, but because you've been broken, you've fallen, even shattered. And yet here you are, still alive, still witnessing, still growing, more quietly than any tale could tell, yet deeper than any textbook lesson. Your story, if shared at the right time with the right person, might just save a life teetering on the edge. I once met Trevor, a 73-year-old man in London, a mechanic. Never wrote a book, never appeared on TV, didn't even have social media. But one ordinary day, he spoke with his granddaughter, a young girl being bullied at school, full of shame, ready to drop out. He told her about his own childhood, beatings, insults, being called worthless, and how he stopped believing in people, turned to machines, because machines never lied. That's why he became a mechanic. His granddaughter didn't drop out. That story, later posted by his daughter, went viral. No writing skills, no dramatic twists, just an old man speaking truth. And because it was true, it touched people. Your story is no different. It's not small, it's just been silent for too long. I know you've thought, what's special about my story? But what's special isn't the circumstance. It's that you survived what others are still lost in. And because you don't dress it up, don't brag, don't demand recognition, your story becomes believable. Because no one trusts a life that's all success. But everyone longs to hear from a life that's fallen and got back up anyway. You think you don't know how to tell a story, but you've told it over dinner, in a hand squeeze, in the look you gave someone who was hurting. A story isn't a speech, it's a sharing from someone who's walked the road to someone who's just entering it. All it takes is your voice. But I once felt just as lost as you. I once thought I had no worth. I once stayed awake all night not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Words like that, spoken by someone in their 60s with no need for fame, no ego to feed, carry more power than any philosophy. I've seen Denise, an American woman, twice bankrupt, divorced, a son addicted to drugs. She thought her life was nothing but failure until she started writing short letters for the church newsletter, letters to single mothers struggling like she once did. No preaching, no judgment, just writing as if speaking to her 40-year-old self. Then a group formed. Then a nonprofit emerged. Then it spread to 5 states. Nothing grand, just one woman brave enough to share what she lived. And that became a quiet wave that changed a community. You can start the same way. Grab a pen, write one line. Before I learned to forgive, or before I knew how to rise from failure, then write, I truly believed I couldn't keep living. Then add, now I want to help anyone who feels like I once did. Those 3 lines, well, that's your first story. And somewhere out there, someone is waiting for that exact story to help them through a dark chapter of life. You don't need hundreds of listeners, you just need one who truly needs it. The story doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be true. And you are the only one who can tell it, because you lived it. Don't carry it to the grave, let it live on through someone else's heart. So that's not storytelling, that's legacy, that's redemption. That's how your old pain becomes valuable, because through it, someone else finds the strength to keep going. And if you're still asking, does anyone need to hear my story? I'll say it clearly, yes. Because the world doesn't need more moral lectures. The world needs more real people who have been shattered but still dare to speak. And if you're brave enough, then you are exactly the person the world has been waiting for. Not everyone wants to start a company. Not everyone is meant to run a business or chase growth metrics. And that's perfectly okay. But what I want you to understand is this. You don't need to be an entrepreneur to make an impact. You just need to begin living a life that leaves a mark, not on the vast world out there, but on someone, on a group of people, on a small community where your presence can truly make a difference. I once met a man in Japan named Teshi, 67 years old, retired after decades in logistics. After retiring, he didn't choose complete rest. He went to a programming training center for young people, not to teach code, but to be a rhythm keeper. He didn't speak much. He didn't teach technical skills. His role was simply to sit and listen to students talk about stress, guide them in managing emotions, and encourage them through failure. No computer, no app, just his life experience, which he used for one purpose, helping others stay mentally grounded in a digital world spinning out of control. Eventually, major tech companies started inviting him to do exactly that, not as a programmer, but as a mentor in character and resilience. That wasn't a job. It was a living legacy. You don't need a product to sell. You don't need a customer base. What you carry inside you is your asset. And the mark you leave isn't measured in profit. It's measured by how many people live differently because you once chose to live truthfully. I remember Margaret, 74, living in New Zealand. Her whole life she worked with wool, hand-knitting gloves and scarves, using techniques passed down from her grandmother. No website, no social media. She simply sat at a weekend market stall and sold a few pieces. One day, a young couple asked why her wool was so soft. She smiled and said, "Because I'm not in a rush." That answer struck something in them. They brought her work into a small store, then introduced it to others. Now her items have waiting lists months long. But what she loves most isn't the sales, it's the story behind each piece. She says, "I don't sell scarves, I preserve a way of life. That is a mark." You may not know how to paint or write or launch a startup, but you know what helped you stay standing after grief. You know how to teach a child to get through hard times. You know how to keep a family from falling apart. You know how to save, how to face illness, how to listen without judging. Each of these, if shared sincerely with the right person at the right time, is a legacy. And real impact isn't about scale, it's about depth. Jutta, a retired nurse in Germany, lost her husband, her sister, and 2 beloved patients in the same year. She didn't run from the pain. She started a sharing circle at home, not a therapy group, not a seminar, just tea, candles, a few chairs. From 3 people to 8, then 20. Now Jutta leads community healing sessions in libraries, hospitals, and online, for free, with no fame, no social media. But more than 400 people have walked out of darkness thanks to the space she created. This wasn't a business. But it left a legacy, bigger than many who've stood on stages preaching success. I'm telling you all this not so you'll copy them, but so you'll realize if you're still breathing, you can still plant seeds. Maybe that seed won't grow into a forest, but it might become a shade tree for someone lost in the burning sun. And that alone is enough for a life to be meaningful. Don't think you have to do something great, you just have to do something real. Don't wait for permission. Don't search for the perfect model. Start with what you know best. The thing you once wished someone had told you when you were younger. Write it down. Or simply say it to someone who needs to hear it. That's how legacies begin, not in spotlights, but in moments when real people touch something true. You don't need to be an entrepreneur. You need to be someone who has lived and is brave enough to give a piece of that life as a gift to someone else. Because sometimes a life that has once been hurt, when shared the right way, becomes a survival map for someone walking through the dark. That is not a job. That's a mission. Some lies aren't crafted intentionally, but their danger lies in how quietly they're repeated, slipping into small talk, well-meaning advice, and silent nods, until you accept them as truth. They're not loud. They don't attack you directly. They do one thing: steal your right to start again. And if you're 60 or older, I need you to stay alert and face 3 lies that silently trap millions of people every single day. The first lie: you're too old to start over. It sounds harmless, but it plants a false ending in your mind. It makes you think 60 is the time to shrink, to slow down, to step aside for the younger generation. But look at reality. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of the UK at 65. Colonel Sanders franchised KFC at 62. And there are people like Ruth, who opened her first bakery at 63. Not to prove anything, but to live the life she loved. They didn't start over to get rich. They started over because they refused to die while still alive. True beginnings don't require youth. They require awakening. And at 60, for the first time in your life, you have exactly that. Don't let anyone, especially yourself, tell you it's too late. Too late is when you're no longer breathing. As long as you have a heartbeat, you have the right to begin again. This time, in a way no one ever taught you. The second lie: no one wants to hear your story. This lie has killed more dreams than failure ever did, because it silences you. It makes you believe your story is too ordinary, too messy, too outdated to hold value. But the truth is, people don't need more hollow advice. They need a real story from a real person who has fallen apart and still chose to keep living. You think you're just a regular mother who raised children alone. You don't know how many women out there are hoping someone like you will tell them how you did it. You went bankrupt. Someone on the edge of that same cliff is waiting to hear a voice that says, I was there too, and I made it. Your story doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be true. And when it's told, not to impress, but to share, it becomes a map. And maps are crucial, especially when someone is walking through the darkness you once escaped. The third lie: focusing on your story is selfish. Society gives adults a dangerous label. Living for others is praised, but living for yourself is called selfish. That's why you spend your life serving family, duty, expectations, and now at 60 you feel guilty even thinking about doing something for you. But the truth is the opposite. When you start living truthfully, when you begin sharing the real lessons of your life, you're not being selfish, you're giving something back. You're helping the next generation avoid getting lost. You're turning your wounds into a torch for others. There is nothing more selfless than that. And if you carry that story inside you until your last breath, the loss isn't just yours, it's everyone's. Everyone who could have been guided by what you paid for with your youth, your tears, your mistakes. These 3 lies aren't written in books. They live in your everyday thoughts, in offhand jokes, in the sympathetic looks when you say you want to learn something new, write a book, or start a community project. But you have the power to reject them. No one else can break them for you, only you can. You don't need to do something grand. You just need to pause, take a breath, and say to yourself, I didn't know the answers this time because but I am not too late. I am not invisible, and I'm not meaningless. That single belief, once you truly accept it, becomes the knife that cuts through every limit others have placed on your life. Don't let a loud, fast-paced world make you forget the richness of your journey. Don't let silence born of self-doubt turn you into someone who dies with a treasure no one ever touched. Look back at these 3 lies and start living as if you never believed them. Because from this moment on, you don't need anyone's permission to lead. You only need yourself and one real step. The rest will shift, not from outside, but from the power within you that has slept too long. And now it's time to wake it up. I'm speaking to you, the one reading these words, the one who's lived quietly for years, fulfilled your duties, endured your pain, and walked through life in silence. That it's time to stop diminishing what you've been through. Stop hiding the story that made you who you are. And most of all, stop avoiding a truth you've dodged for far too long. You were not born to stay silent until the end. You were born to live honestly, clearly, and with impact. Your silence isn't humility. It's the result of years being taught to step aside, to be reasonable, to not cause a stir. But those very beliefs have led millions of people over 60 to think the rest of their lives should be spent retreating, shrinking, staying out of the way. I say no. You've spent too long living under expectations. Now is the time to live in truth. And that truth, though cracked and scarred, is the one thing you own that the world desperately needs. Unreplicable lived experience. I've met many people like you, those carrying a vault of valuable lessons that no one ever asked to hear. They know how to navigate crisis without panic. They understand the power of staying calm in anger. They know when to speak and when to stay quiet. But they never share because they think they have nothing special. That is the biggest mistake. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs someone who dares to speak something real. Something only a person who has lived long enough can say. That truth doesn't have to be perfect to be worth sharing. Let me ask you this. How many times in your life have you thought, I wish someone had told me this back then, so why now? When you have the chance to be that person for someone else, are you staying silent? Why let such precious lessons rot in memory instead of passing them on like a torch? If you've ever walked through heartbreak, stood back up after failure, killed a dream and learned how to reignite it, then you have something worth saying. And if you don't say it, who will? Someone with less experience, someone who talks well but has never truly lived? I don't need you to become a leader. I don't need you to stand before a crowd. I just need you to look in the mirror and say, my story deserves to be heard. Because if you don't tell it, one day you'll watch someone repeat your same mistake, and you'll regret it. Regret that you could have saved them with a word, a letter, a quiet share, but you stayed silent. You don't need to write a book. You don't need to start a group. You don't need to sound like an expert. You just need to do one thing. Open up. Speak a lesson you once paid for in tears. Write down a chapter you once buried. Send out a message someone needs to hear right now. Maybe that person is your grandchild, your neighbor, a stranger who stumbles across your words. You can't control the outcome, but you can control the action. And the first action is not staying silent any longer. I've said it since the beginning. You're not starting from zero. You're starting from accumulation. And as long as you're still breathing, every minute you stay silent is a minute you're wasting a living legacy that took 60 years to build. Legacy isn't in assets, it's in wisdom passed on, in hope reawakened, in experience shared at the right moment. And if you're waiting for someone to invite you to speak, you'll be waiting forever. This era doesn't know how to ask the right people. You have to speak first. I'm speaking to you not as a stranger, but as someone who also lived too long in silence. I've learned this. Silence saves no one. Only real words, real stories, real lessons create real change. And you, not anyone else, hold that power. Write a short note, say one small thing, start a conversation, not to change the world, but to awaken a soul that has forgotten itself. And if you need a reason, here it is. You've survived what others are praying just to get through. Don't let that life pass as if it never happened. Don't let those lessons die with you. Speak, tell, pass it on. Let your life become the message someone in despair needs to hear right now. And if you do that, you've lived not just for yourself, but for all those you may never meet. And that is how a life echoes with meaning.